And welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with May Rain and St. Christian Militia. Joining me tonight on the line, we got a special Catholic roundtable. I got good friends of mine, Julien DeMarco, Andrew Chabot, and Connor Davis tonight. We're going to be talking about the super duper trad community in America tonight. Gentlemen, Julien, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Fantastic. Connor, how you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, Frank.
Andrew, my friend, how's it going?
Hey, how are you, Frank?
All right, great. Just want to make sure we acknowledge everybody's here. Gentlemen, we got together tonight because I thought, in light of the situation with church militant and restoring the faith, not that I want to go into details about their squabble, it highlights again some of the problems within the traditionalist community in America, where there seems to be constant hostilities, constant competition of sorts, and really just an environment that's unpleasant as fellow Catholics, brothers and sisters in Christ. For my part, I know Mike of Restoring the Faith. Me and Julie had the honor to interview him a while back, and he was nothing but just a gracious gentleman when we interviewed him. And so, without getting too much into details, because it's their spat, I want to ask you, gentlemen, the question here. The trad Catholic community in America. It's something that's a little odd for me as the son of an immigrant and Sicilians, because we really don't have these kind of trad kind of movements in Italy. It's something that's very unique to America. I hear there's some of that in France going on, but here we are, supposedly brothers in Christ. We're all supposed to be Catholics, and yet when it comes to really the faith in itself, when it comes to what is going on within, traditionalist circles, it seems like we're all really stabbing each other in the back here. Andrew, I'm going to go to you first. What do you think is going on here? How do you explain these divisions in the American traditionalist camp?
Well, I think it's a function of our culture. I mean, especially, you can't get away from some of the facts of this case, of this situation. Wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the online culture. So I don't think it's so much, I don't focus on the traditionalist aspect of it so much as the fact that no one is immune from, the Americanism and modernism that we're all kind of steeped in. If you use, what is that movie with Andy Dufresne, the prison break movie? What is Shawshank Redemption? I mean, it's a really crude and rough reference, but you can't go swimming through a mile of excrement without getting some on you. I think you apply that to the online culture as well. I mean, it's just a cesspool of negativity and individualism in the worst sense of the word, where everybody just becomes an island. But that's my take on that.
Yeah, that's interesting take, actually, and I agree with a lot of. There's something about the online community, Connor. It seems to me that behind the walls of anonymity, oftentimes, or behind the walls of the internet, because we really don't have to treat each other with any kind of respect when you really look at an individual person eye to eye. There seems to be a level of dismissiveness. We know Twitter is an absolute sewer hole when in regards to politics and everything that's evolved, and it looks like it's spread to the Catholic world. I know when I was in the sort of the classical liberal camp, I was in the sort of conservative right movement. We had similar problems over in the days before Facebook, where we were doing shows on Blog Talk Radio, and there was always a competition for clicks and likes and positive comments. We all wanted kind of our egos boosted because of the internet in many respects. And I mean, do you agree with Andrew here that this is more of an online phenomenon rather than a traditionalist movement on the ground?
Yeah, I want to start off by saying that I do agree with Andrew to a great extent. That being said, I think that it was ultimately inevitable. It harkens back to our Lord in the garden, or was it the garden, or where he pled that they would be one. So he knew right then and there that the church would fracture with divisions. But that being said, he still wants us to try to unify with, true doctrine, true faith. And it's a constant struggle in the church. It was prophesied by our Lord himself. But definitely the internet helps speed that along and cause greed and infighting. And like you said, a competition for likes and views.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Julian, your thoughts, my friend.
Well, I do agree with Connor and Andrew wholeheartedly. But it was something that you said at the beginning that really, I just came up with this working thought. But you said that there's not this issue of traditional movements or what be in, Italy or in any of those types of areas, but you did say it's in France or in America. It's one thing that I've just realized now, this whole traditionalist movement tends to be in the Anglo-Franco sphere. And what I mean by that, in either England or America or Canada or New Zealand or Australia or France, they tend to have these traditionalist movements. But in other countries, like Italy, for example, you don't seem to see these traditionalist movements. And if they are there, they seem to be a little bit more unified than in England or America or Canada or Australia. There does seem to be a lot of division between traditionalists, the traditionalist movement, community, whatever name you want to give it. But it doesn't, and I wonder why it's just seems to be located in these countries and these areas of the world, and it doesn't seem to be a phenomenon somewhere else. But that also makes me think of what Charles Colomb said. He said in one of his videos that he was doing on a podcast, he was asked a question about the traditionalist movement in Europe versus America. And he basically said that in Europe used to be Catholic, whether it's a Protestant country or a Catholic country in name only. If you walk out your door, you can find a church down the street or whatever the case may be. You'll see a Saint Michael the Archangel statue or the Blessed Mother or something to that effect. So what traditionalists are trying to do in those countries they're just trying to restore what they lost, according to Charles. But for traditionalists in America, what they're really trying to do is reach a whole new paradigm. Because this country was never Catholic. This country was a hodgepodge of Protestantism. So what traditionalists are ultimately trying to do, from what Charles said in his answer that he gave, is what they're really trying to do is reach something that was never. They're trying to reach a whole new plane of existence because they can't regain anything because there was nothing that they didn't lose anything to begin with. If any of this is making sense.
Yeah, it does. It's very interesting too. I got a lot of thoughts on that, but I like to go to Connor. Connor, I know you're of Polish descent.
Yeah.
I'll just say from my Sicilian perspective, especially my father and my mother, they grew up in a very homogenous culture. Everybody was Catholic. Particularly my mother grew up on a smaller island off the coast of Sicily, one of the three islands of the Agadi Islands, very small. And so when you're growing up in these smaller Catholic communities, there's just one church in town. It's a Catholic church. It's the center of the piazza, right? And everybody's Catholic. The culture is Catholic. Everybody goes to the same Catholic church. Protestants never really made their inroads in Italy, just like I believe Protestants really struggled in Poland. I guess my question for you is there these types of divisions in Poland, or is it more kind of like, Sicilian culture where it's kind of more homogenous and these divisions really don't exist, not to this level?
Yeah. From what I understand of modern Poland, I don't think you see a whole lot of this. Poland, like you said, it's pretty homogenous. It's always been Catholic since its baptism. Is there infighting? There is, but I don't think it's nearly to the extent that you'll see in the United States. Definitely not.
Yeah, yeah,
Why it is, I'm not sure.
Can we get the issue clarified a little bit here? I mean, are we attributing the church militant RTF fight as traditionalist infighting?
that's a great question, Andrew.
Because I just don't see it that way personally. I don't see it as, I don't think of church militant as being traditionalist. I don't necessarily think of, I don't know the principle of RTF. I've watched a few of the episodes. He seemed like a great, it seemed like he had a good presence for the camera. I just don't think of traditionalists. I definitely don't think of traditional Catholicism when I read, what they wrote about him. Including the complaint that they filed in civil court and the reasons they stated for filing it. I don't see all that behavior and think, oh, that's a traditional Catholic. Honestly, I just look at all that behavior and feel shame that they're running around wearing the label traditional Catholic, and that all of us are kind of getting swept up into it as if like, oh, well, that's the traditionalists fighting. That's just the American traditionalists. And
yeah, Andrew, I agree with you. I don't think church militant is traditionalist. Lots of people, I'm not like a gung-ho church militant fan. Or let me preface it. I've liked church militant in the past, but I was never, a church militant cheerleader. But I never saw them, even when I did like them, before they really ruined the shine on themselves for me. I never saw them as traditionalists. I always saw them as neocons, neoconservatives.
Right.
Yeah.
So so I don't really think of them as traditionalists in any way, shape, or form. And I think people seem to misunderstand traditionalist and neoconservative. They're two different things. And seeing as I do have good information on church militant and restoring the faith is definitely, if we're all in agreement of what a traditionalist and a neocon is, restoring the faith is traditionalist and church militant is neocon.
Okay, so let me present this. Let me present this and why I would argue it is a traditionalist issue. It's because restoring the faith came to the defense of a Father Jackson, who is very widely known and very popular within the FSSP, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where the traditionalist line comes in, because the argument is that church militant, again, doesn't like the SSPX or doesn't like these more traditionalist movements. They're willing to give credit to priests that they see more in their liking, whether it's, again, classical, liberal, whatever you want to call it. But here is, again, you got a situation where you got restoring the faith that's more traditionalist minded, coming to the defense, trying to get to the bottom of the truth of what happened with this allegation with this traditionalist priest. Again, very well beloved by traditionalist community. And that's where the spat begins, Andrew. I mean, does that make it a traditionalist issue?
Not until there's something on the other side. I mean, I guess maybe I'm just unfamiliar with church militant, and they have a dog in this fight, but they're not pro SSPX, right? The church militant is not pro SSPX.
No, they're anti, actually, very anti, I believe.
So, you wouldn't expect them to have a bias against the FSSP if they're kind of intrinsically biased against the SSPX. So, I mean, are they? Does Michael Boris attend the Novus Ordo?
He attends a Novus Ordo, from what I understand, and I know some people who have met Michael Boris in person, and he likes the Latin Mass, and he's, if you ever watch any of his videos, he's all for the Latin Mass, but for their chapel at their headquarters, and from what I understand, he attends a Ad Orientem Novus Ordo.
Well, Connor's chomping at the bit to get in here, I think. Did you want to say something?
I was listening.
Okay, no, I misread your body language.
No, I don't want to get on Boris yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking what you're saying seriously, and I'm trying to consider it, Frank. Is that make it a traditionalist issue? Because the priest was a traditionalist, the priest is a traditional Catholic. I mean, I think that if church militant, if that's what their purpose was in going about this, if they really just had a burr under their saddle because finally there's one of their hated enemies is in the crosshairs and they're not going to let him out, then I would see this as an attack on tradition. But I don't see it as traditionalist infighting because I just don't think of church militant as traditional, and I didn't even before this last situation came up.
Question:
Right.
Do you think they're traditional?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Do they identify as a traditional Catholic?
So they identify as traditional Catholics. Michael Boris always talks about, how they're traditionalist and they're this and they're that. And it's interesting because they're okay with the Second Vatican Council, and to a certain extent. And as other YouTubers and other commentators have said, one of the reasons why they like the Second Vatican Council is because Michael Boris is able to do what he's able to do. Prior to the Second Vatican Council, a layperson like Michael Boris wouldn't be able to do what he's doing.
You mean lay people in general, or?
Not necessarily.
Okay, say no more. That's all I was wondering what you're asking.
Okay. Okay. Well, we start this podcast by saying we don't want to get intermixed into this little spat, and here we are. And for the record, I'm not taking any sides here on this issue. Just for my part, I'm more interested in the broader context of the division within traditionalist movement, whether we consider this traditionalist movement or not. That's what we're discussing here. And I guess, to take it again to the broader discussion, because many people would argue there's massive divisions in traditionalist movement. Now again, we could discuss whether it's just online or it's in person, but I guess one of the things that's come out of this, one of the grander discussions, Connor, I'll go to you first, is the fact that because the Latin Mass now is, I guess, a minority mass, I guess you want to call it, and a lot of Catholics have to drive 2 and 3 and 4 hours oftentimes to find the Latin Mass. You're showing up to the Latin Mass really without people from your same community, right? I go back to, again, the sort of the parallel of my mother, being raised in a small island. Everybody went to the same church. Everybody lived in the same town. Everybody understood the rules, the same customs. Everybody had the same priest. You followed the priest, essentially, is what you did. But when Catholics are driving really from all over the map here in America to get to this one parish, they don't belong to the same local communities. They really don't know each other. Sure, they may have donuts after Mass or whatever it is that church does. Does that trip up the idea of Catholic culture and Catholic community amongst traditionalists? And could that be a reason for some of these divisions?
Well, I'm really glad you asked me this. I actually heard this accusation from, I'm going to bring in a buzz name here, a certain E. Michael Jones.
Okay, sure.
Who I have a lot of respect for, but I had him over and we had this discussion. he made that accusation as well, that it wasn't the same. It wasn't natural like the previous ethnic kind of oriented parishes. And Andrew, as far as the reason for that, Andrew's got a really good viewpoint on the personal parishes. You're more versed in that sort of field. We were talking about it the other day when that was brought up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more versed in I am. I think that you don't really have much opportunity to build culture. And that's what, to kind of revisit our previous theme, that's what we're trying to do, is to build a culture from blueprints. It's hard enough to kind of renovate and build out from something where the structure is already set, which is what you'd have in, say Italy, or Poland or France. But we're trying to build things out from basically from a blueprint. You take our parish, for instance. It's in the middle of a not so great neighborhood on the west side, and you talk to some of the surrounding neighbors about what their perception of us is as we come into this this 125-year-old Polish church that's now in the middle of not a great neighborhood.
No.
And the you talk to some of the neighbors, and they have the impression of us as cockroaches, that we come out of the church and we just scatter, we all kind of go our separate ways.
Well,
and
Yeah.
that was kind of a moment for me to kind of stop and smell the roses. That's how we're being perceived.
yeah.
Is that pretty much how we're acting? We're just coming in, and are we really doing anything to build culture, or are we just basically hanging on to a life raft and basically just barely salvaging the little bit that's left? It kind of mixed up my metaphors there.
Well, hey Frank, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in.
Yeah.
As much as I respect Andrew and Julian's position, I wouldn't say that we're starting from blueprints. Surely we don't have the same roots as, say, Italy or France. But like you said, the parish that we attend, it's 125 years old. That's served the multiple generations of my own family. So in a sense, we're kind of restoring. I mean, it's kind of a restoration as well.
It's
Yeah.
true.
Okay.
That's true.
Well, I think we're working with what we have, but I think Julian can speak to this. I think, Julian, we've all been scattered in this globalist economy, and I think that's reflected to how Catholics live their lives. Listen, I was forced to flee because of this globalist economy from my home of Los Angeles almost 20 years ago now, Julian, and I find myself as sort of a transient Catholic in the middle of Mormon Utah over here, right? And while I have no problem with the Mormons themselves, other than my disagreements with their theological beliefs, I think maybe what Andrew and Connor are describing is a byproduct of American liberalism, how it divides everybody at every level. And Catholics are being affected by that, I think, Julian.
Yeah. So I've been to Connor and Andrew's parish. I can also attest that it is not in a great neighborhood.
Yeah.
I remember when Connor took me to another church, because we went church hopping, well, not hopping, but sightseeing on Sunday. And we went down this street, literally a block from the street, and there was a little shrine for somebody. They got murdered on the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just,
Well, yeah.
I was like, wow, okay, well, that's a thing. And my church is not necessarily, it's in an okay neighborhood. I mean, although somebody's car got stolen and there was a dead body found in the house next to the priory, so I mean, where my church is at is not a step above where Connor and Andrew's church is at. So I can't. But I have to. My territorial parish is literally 3 minutes from where I live, or a 15-minute walk, I pass 3 Roman Catholic churches, 2 Byzantine Catholic churches, to get to my parish. I think that is completely oh, actually, no. Did I say 3 Roman Catholic parishes? Or did I say 2?
3.
3? Okay, yeah, it's 4 actually. I forgot Saint Benedict the More. But I pass all of these to get to my church because of the beauty and the aesthetics and the theological soundness. No Catholic should have to do that on a given Sunday. Every Catholic should be able to walk 3 minutes or drive, 5 minutes or 15 minutes to their territorial parish in the community, because that actually strengthens community, the local community of where you're at. Now, I actually, the parish where I'm at has a very strong community. I mean, the last 2 Thanksgivings, I was hosted by 2 separate families that I'm very close with, and I have I've been adopted by an old couple who adopts young children who are new to the parish, and especially converts, especially seeing as they're converts themselves. So we have a great community that takes care of each other, but we all live, some live in a whole nother Catholic community. There's a place called Brookline. A lot of people from the parish live there, but that's probably 20 minutes away from the parish. There's another family that owns a nice farm where we have the Altar Boy pig roast. They live probably an hour away, so they come an hour and a half every single Sunday, and sometimes multiple times throughout the week.
Okay.
Well, it's not something that is conducive to I'm losing the word here, but it's not conducive for the long term, because you don't actually you can build community, but it takes a lot more work.
Okay. Let me ask this.
What were you about to say, Andrew? Could Andrew say what he would?
Well, I don't want to interrupt Frank.
No, go for it, Andrew.
So I kind of want to piggyback off what you're saying there, Julian. It's not, and I don't mean this to say. I don't mean to say this at you, but it's not meant to be easy. And it's meant to be. It takes work, and I think it always has. I think it always has been, a struggle, an actual contest. Even, if you go back 100 years, I know in South Bend, you have quite a few instances of Polish churches that are in close proximity to each other, not because there were so many Poles that they just had to have 2 churches within a couple blocks. The Poles didn't get along with each other. Yeah. And they had to have separate space so they wouldn't kill each other. We have St. Hedwig's and St. Patrick's.
Oh, I love that story.
Right across the street from each other, 2 massive churches. And I mean, they're literally across the street from each other. Even the way they're built, it's like a big, screw you to the Germans behind us. You get the back of the church type of thing.
I saw that church.
It wasn't all unified back then.
Yeah, so there's always been, but that's in the U.S. and maybe that's why they were able to. I think that there was a concerted plan to destroy the Catholic neighborhoods.
Definitely.
I think that there's some.
Well, didn't E. Michael Jones talks about this?
Yeah.
I think in one of his books.
He was piggybacking, not piggybacking. He was assembling other people's work on that. That wasn't all just his his personal opinions or anything like
Oh
that.
yeah, he's the only one that I know that has talked about it, and then I delved deeper into looking into that.
I think there's a lot of veracity to that. I mean, I don't see how it makes sense any other way other than I don't think you can explain the evaporation of Catholic neighborhoods other than the way he described it. Really,
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing that really makes sense.
Right.
But when you start, that's kind of issue one or point number one. The point I really wanted to get to had to do with when we were talking about the neighborhoods where the Institute of Christ the King churches tend to be, where the Fraternal Society of St. Peter churches used to be. They tend to be in the roughest of neighborhoods. And I think that the thinking or the reasoning behind that, the mechanics behind it, tend to be that I think it's that the bishops are giving them the properties that are more of a headache to maintain and to it's not trying to discourage them, but we're not gonna give you a brand new cathedral in the middle of the city, right? We're not gonna give you new property. We're going to give you this more or less the problem properties.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the mechanics behind it, but I think there's really kind of a beautiful theological symmetry that comes about.
Okay, so
the church as the ark, you have these arcs
right
out there in the middle of the raging ocean, where kind of where they belong. A refuge in the middle of the sea. That's so.
Yeah. That's
well. Okay, so that leads to the next logical question then. What if certain families are uncomfortable going to church in these neighborhoods, and they pass that up in favor of a Novus Ordo in a nicer neighborhood? Are their souls in peril? Because I think some traditions would argue that it's traditional Latin Mass only, Novus Ordo is as fake as can be.
I think that they should weigh it with prudence. Observe the situation and see how much of a risk it is.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Fortitude.
That's a tough
now
one.
you're talking about traditionalist infighting, because you're talking about a family conversation, right? You're talking about mom on one side and dad on the other.
Yeah.
In a lot of situations.
Yeah, listen, the closest traditional Mass to me is about 2.5 hours away. It's in Vegas. And it's a rough neighborhood. I'm talking about homeless scattered everywhere, highest crime rates that there are down there. The church itself is barred up all the way around it. And
Isn't it sad, too? If you recall?
What's that?
Wasn't it said of a contest?
I believe that one is set of a contest, actually. Yeah, I went there once to check it out because we were thinking about driving down. I didn't know set of a contest when I went down there, but even if it's a beautiful little chapel. I've been there. The priest was okay. He was nice. Told me, oh, you want to come here? You got to come confession first. I'm like, okay, fine, no problem. But it's a rough neighborhood, man. It's rough, and as a father, it's tough, and maybe that's. Maybe I got to put my faith in God, but at the same time, like you said, Connor, prudence, and I'm a little hesitant, to be honest with you. So that's me.
It's interesting because when Bishop Snyder came to our parish about when did the Amazon thing happen?
2019, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we've been stuck in 2020 for the last 2 years, so forgive me for forgetting when 2019 was. But when he came, I was talking with a friend of mine about like a bishop of this stature coming, and it was just like, oh, our parish is in such a bad neighborhood, or whatever the case may be. And she says, oh, he's probably used to it, because almost every single traditional parish, it doesn't matter if it's institute or fraternity, are in a bad neighborhood. Yeah. And so he's like, he's used to it by now. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you're right, but that's sad that we get short-staffed. When we tend to be the largest parishes, or if not the largest, the most active parish, and on an economic level, which that seems to be what all the bishops care about, we seem to be also the most prosperous parish. Now, we might not be, we might not have a lot of rich people, is what I'm not prosperous in that. Prosperous in the donations, in the offerings, in terms of giving, because people tend to, at these churches, have a much more, since they are theologically sound and know that they're supposed to tithe, they give more, unlike other parishes in the Novus Ordo, where they're less theologically sound and they don't understand the importance of tithing.
Yeah. Hey, so I had a buddy and he wants to come to the church. So I took him down to my parish. And the first day we're driving on the road to it, and we see a guy walking around with like a semi-automatic rifle just on the streets. So he's like, "Where have you brought me?" And I told him, I said that it's very good symbolism for outside of the church. It's surrounded by darkness and death.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I think there's something to be said about this, though. Like you're talking about with Bishop Schneider, Julien, and
yes,
ours is not a faith of comfort and lukewarmness. I mean, what really identifies the faith, if you will. I mean, I think of baptism as a formal commitment to martyrdom. And I don't think it's just a symbolic claim that we're called to seal our faith with martyrdom.
Okay.
And, I mean, we would drive a couple hours to mass every Sunday when I was growing up, and it was same kind of thing. Even then, the really solid traditional churches tended to not be in good neighborhoods even back in the early 90s. It's but it formed us into the people we are today, and it's a very small taste of martyrdom, I think, on a weekly basis. It's a good reminder that I know that me and my family need it, a weekly reminder that you might die any day. You never really know. And if you died right after receiving communion, I can't think of a better way to go when it comes down to it.
Okay, good. All right, so I think we've covered the traditionalist divisions, and as we kind of, let's see, we're 30 minutes into this. I say I got a couple more questions for you guys before we close it out, and it's related again to some of the issues that I hear traditionalists talk about. The first of which I'm going to ask you guys. I know I'm not a theologian here. I don't know if anybody else here is a theologian, but again, a simple layman's conversation. The Novus Ordo Mass, valid or invalid?
I believe it's valid.
Valid.
I believe it's valid with an asterisk next to it.
Okay, what's the asterisk?
The arbitrariness of it, the history of it, right. The inorganicness of it, which really just goes back to the arbitrariness of it, the top-down fiatness of it. Dr. Peter Konowalski talks about this. If you're not familiar with him, he's a author and a theologian.
Got some pretty solid stuff out lately that I've seen.
Yeah, I consider him pretty big.
Yeah, he writes some solid stuff. He's talked at my parish, and I've seen him multiple times, and we chat every now and then. He always remembers my name. He's a really nice guy. he was at my church. He was talking about his latest book. And he was talking about I forget what it was. I forget what the topic was about, but it was it was about the new mass and the old mass and that whole issue. But he was talking about the organicness of the Mass of the Council of Trent versus the Mass of Paul VI. In that only after it wasn't until the modernist period, so after the First Vatican Council, that popes really started ruling fiat-wise, top-down. Now, the Pope has all these powers and all these other things. That's not the issue here that I'm trying to make, nor is Dr. Peter Konowalski saying either. But what he is saying is that the Pope, when it comes to the Mass, just from a top-down standpoint, making it this type of way throughout the whole entire church, it's unprecedented, and it's not something that is part of the church's history.
Are you talking about that line that the Pope is the absolute master of the liturgy?
I think so. I think I might be talking about that. If you might, why?
Oh, just that's I take issue with that.
Okay.
The idea or that phrasing, that mindset that the Pope
That
is
he is
the absolute master of liturgy, because it presumes or it kind of implies that he doesn't have to have a reason behind anything that he does, that he can be completely arbitrary and make changes that have no basis in reason, and the rest of us just need to just kind of capitulate. Which
So are you saying
is not Catholic obedience? It is not the Catholic understanding of the liturgy or the rites. So
okay? So if I'm supposed to understand what you're saying is, you don't believe that he is the absolute master of liturgy.
no, that's not quite what I'm saying. He is, in the sense that he has the power to make changes that are necessary to achieve the ends that have already been spelled out.
Right.
So for instance, Quo Primum by Pius V.
Right.
Saint Pius V could have abolished rites that were older than 200 years at that point, but he made a prudential call that, and I think he made that call to leave the door open for the Orthodox to come back.
Right.
I think is why he said rites that were newer than 200 years were wiped out, but rites that were older were preserved. I think he had the authority to wipe out even those rites that were older than 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't, for some very good reasons. The principles behind what he was doing were always very upfront and very well respected. Now compare that to, just kind of ad hoc saying, well, no more Latin Mass at all, or only in very specific circumstances. Oh, and no Triduum in the city of Rome next year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no rhyme or reason behind it. They don't even make an effort to produce a viable reason anymore. It's just kind of, as you said, just ruled by fiat, which is not.
Yeah.
That's not consistent at all with the exercise of papal authority that you can see throughout history. It's not consistent.
So I would say that all three of us, me, you, and Dr. Peter Konowalski, are all in agreement then. And that's why, Frank, that's why I say there's an asterisk that the Mass is valid, but there's an asterisk next to it. And,
Okay.
and besides also the history with Bunini, and just everything else with what we know, what happened in the 40s and the 50s, Validity, the communist infiltration,
The Protestants at Vatican II. Yes, there's a lot.
Protestants. So yes, it's
Yeah.
valid, but there's an asterisk. Long
Right.
story
That's
short.
actually why I advocate for the 55 if possible, because Bonini was already messing with it after that with the Holy Week, for example.
Okay. All right. That's interesting,
Which the
gentlemen.
Holy Week is also the oldest liturgy of the church, East and West.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll leave it with you guys. Like I said, I'm not a theologian here, but it's fascinating to listen to these discussions, see where everybody comes down on this, because again, when we talk about trad divisions, that's one of them. And I think the last thing tonight I want to bring up, gentlemen, and this is something that comes up in trad circles, right? Concerning Catholic families, concerning really natural family planning, and birth control for that matter. A lot of trads out there will tell you that, well, natural family planning as incorporated, I believe, by John Paul II is nothing more than Catholic contraceptions. There really is very little reason not for Catholics to consistently make babies, man. I've heard some Catholics say, if you don't have at least a dozen kids, you're not a very good Catholic. Okay. So, again, natural family planning as incorporated by John Paul II, yay, nay, and for those of us that don't have a dozen kids in the home, are we bad Catholics?
Well, I'm not married, so I have no kids. So does that make me a bad Catholic?
Yes.
Do I have the most kids out of everybody here?
How many you got?
Yes.
I'm at 3. So,
Yeah, we have 5.
Okay, yeah, I think you got the most, so I think you probably got the most to say on this, Andy.
So Andrew's the best Catholic out of all of us. We're all bad
The
Catholics.
resident expert on this matter, I guess.
Yeah, but you're 7 kids short from earning your own planet. Oh, sorry, that's Mormon. I mean,
No, they say there's some tradition where the 12th baby gets baptized by the bishop.
really?
That's what we're aiming for.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay.
It's a real tradition. I
Bishop
think.
Rhodes would come down for that.
So it's I don't claim to be an expert. I'm not a theologian. I don't claim to be an expert on how John Paul II articulated natural family planning, but my take on it is that no, you're not a bad Catholic if you don't have 12 kids. You're not. There's obviously no number you have to reach or anything like that, but the purpose of marriage is to procreate and educate children.
No.
That is your primary purpose. So if you're choosing to have a big boat instead of a 6th or 7th child, and if you actually break it down into the economic factors, that's what it ends up being a lot of times is, I want a boat or a house, a bigger house rather than another child. A lot of times it's not, obviously not every time, but a lot of times that's what it ends up being. If that's the choice you're making as a couple, then you're obviously violating the primary purpose of marriage and making something else the primary purpose of your marriage.
Okay. Agree.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Agree with that.
I guess I look at a lot of times. Are you guys making a deal between you that says, well, we're gonna hold off for the next year and a half, 2 years, so that we can recuperate financially or whatever? You're almost making a side deal in a contract that intrinsically includes God.
Right.
And I see, just kind of anecdotally, I see kind of a tendency to neglect or downplay the action of divine providence on your marriage and your family. If that's the added, like almost an effort to mechanize and take over your own reproductivity, rather than allowing God to be a part of the origins of life. So
Okay. I agree.
I definitely. Okay. Go on.
Let me just step in, Julian, because I agree with you, Andrew. There is some elements of narcissism in our culture concerning finances and economic factors and people choosing, well, I got to be me and I got to be free, all that kind of stuff, that a lot of times it affects the current generation rather than older generations who had more children. But I think in a debt usury system that we live in, there is true poverty, or at least a true lack of financial means in this day and age for a lot of people. And I guess that's the people I want to focus on, people that fit a certain criteria. Now, I know with natural family planning, there's a certain criteria that is supposed to be met before you apply it. Poverty being one of them. I think disabilities, extreme disabilities being another one of them, right? I guess my question is, do we have these extenuating circumstances where it can be applied? And that being said, even when you're using natural flat family planning, are you not technically still open to children? It's not like you've circumvented it with artificial contraception. I mean, you're still doing the bodily action, and the body can respond however it wants, but that's, I guess, the people I'm speaking to.
Well, from what I understand about natural family planning is that when the woman is ovulating, you know when she's ovulating.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want to have another kid, you just have relations when she isn't at her most fertile. But you don't obviously use a contraceptive. So you're still allowing life to happen, because even when she isn't at her most fertile, she can still become pregnant. So, I mean, but if you do it when she's at her most fertile, your chances of getting another child is astronomical. It's like you're hitting the mark. She's going to get pregnant.
Yeah.
But what you talked about, the financial thing, and as Andrew talked about too, I mean, these things do come into play, and I mean, God also is involved as well, naturally. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just I don't know, either a pessimist or a realist. I don't know how you want to classify me, but there has to be. We live in a world where it is not feasibly we live in a world where the world is not conducive to have more than 2 children. I don't make the rules. I just live in it, and I don't do what my masters tell me. But
right.
I mean, we don't live on the farm. We don't all have the same skill sets and education and job opportunities, whether whether we have the ability to do those jobs if they're available, or if those jobs aren't available, then we don't necessarily have the ability to pick up and leave. Either the whole family or the husband leaves and then sends the paycheck back. But we don't have not everybody has the resources to be able to have 12, 14, 16 kids. Now, I know a family that has 14 kids. And 3 of them are priests. And I think their dad was an engineer, maybe. I think their dad's an engineer. I mean, either way, he was making money. He was comfortable. So he could afford to have 14 kids with the wife staying at home. But not everybody has that luxury. So, right. I mean, these are things that have to be taken into consideration. I mean, every child is a blessing, but is it right to bring up a child and to doom them to poverty and other things, and thus not only are they not able to necessarily get their spiritual life in order because they're going to be too busy worrying about the family is going to be too busy worrying about feeding their children, and the children are going to be too busy worrying about if they're going to eat or not to actually worry about their salvation.
Right.
So do you really want to bring a child into the world when you can't afford to feed them? Because there are all these other things that you have to worry about.
Yeah,
but I'm not a dad, so I mean, I'm only speaking from what I have observed. I mean, all 3 of you are dads. I'm the only one that isn't. So I mean, you might have a different perspective.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we lost Connor and Andrew here, but
We're back.
there you are. Okay, I don't see you guys on the screen, but we can hear you. So I guess here's my thing. Here's my thing. I think post-industrial revolution, a lot changed with the world. Okay, and I'm not making excuses here that people should hold off because of that. But we're talking about, generally before the Industrial Revolution, agrarian societies, you had your land, you had kids, they worked the land for you. You didn't have the same financial liabilities, born into the same financial liabilities that we're all born into now. That's nothing more than a perpetual usury system that burdens a lot of people. I mean, just mom and dad alone, I'm just saying, are born into debt, and we're all trying to manage that debt load over our heads for a lifetime. And most people won't ever pay off that debt load. That's just the nature of it. You talk about a society that looks at our living standards very differently. You look at the way our homes are constructed. No land on them, just a dwelling spot without any functionality of growing crops or cattle or whatever business you want to start. I mean, my point is society has shifted into this debt usury system. And there is an argument to be made that, okay, you're going to bring these kids into poverty. Now, I know one of the counter arguments to that is, well, poverty is a blessing according to Catholic tradition. So that would be the counter argument to
But comfort isn't a sin either, though.
Say that again?
Comfort isn't a sin either, though.
Yeah, and I think there's something, listen, if poverty is your lot, it is your cross to carry. Listen, that it is what it is. But at the same time, there's something very dispiriting about extreme economic hardships, particularly in a usury system. I'm just trying to balance, guys, Connor, Andrew here, the mixture between, what is proper Catholic morality in regards to family and modernity, which really complicates things for families. Andrew, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic. Obviously, it's tough. Debt is a trigger word for anybody that has an advanced degree. That's just the word is enough to send you into a conniption fit.
Yeah.
You obviously don't want to saddle your kids with, you don't want them to be born into a debt slavery. So it's imprudent to just keep on having kids that you can't take care of. There's nothing. I don't think that's a Catholic attitude. But it's very closely related to it is the Catholic attitude of not to stress out about things that you don't actually have any control over.
True.
And
yeah,
know that God does provide. So, I think my thing with natural family planning is that if you're trying to avoid the contraceptive mindset, it can be a real challenge. So there are legitimate reasons to use, I don't even like the term natural family planning. There are legitimate times and purposes for periodic abstinence. But
right.
The way I understand it, if it's that serious a reason that you're trying to avoid pregnancy, then those times when you are exercising your rights during times when you're less fertile, or you think you're less fertile, then aren't you taking an imprudent risk? If the situation is so serious, say a health reason, if she gets pregnant again, she's going to have a really hard time. She might have massive blood. She might die. Well, then you don't exercise your rights at all for an extended period of time until that danger's passed, right? You don't say, well, we reduce our risk by 90% by only exercising our rights during on these 8 days of the month or whatever it is. That's not. I think that there's a lot of things that are overlooked and not everybody using natural family planning is using it for the wrong purposes.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of people who are using it basically as a Catholic form of contraception, which is dead wrong, because you can't really be using it as contraception. That's the sin of. It's basically the sin of who's that guy?
Onan.
Basically, the sin of Onan.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my perspective on it. But really, at the end of the day, it's something that husband and wife and priest have to talk about, and it has to be between them. It's, as I understand it, it's always for a limited period of time. You can't just kind of do it
Indefinitely. Yeah.
Like, oh, we're done having kids now. Now we're just going to, we're going to work on our timing. Like that's not. That's Catholic.
That's an abuse.
Yeah, that's.
An abuse of an allowance.
Tough topic.
Well,
right?
what about for women, it's a lot harder than men. A man can keep having babies until he dies, and even after he dies, he can keep having babies. Is if you harvest the sperm after a certain point after a man dies, you can use it to inseminate. So, but a woman, she only has, a certain amount of time that she is fertile from the time that she has her flower till she hits menopause. But the older she gets, the dangerous it is, not only for her, but also for the baby. Once a woman that is past 35, who is 38, from a medical standpoint, she's ancient. She's like 9. She's like a 90-year-old having a baby. I forget what the word is, but it starts with a G. It's like gastro something. Once she's in her 40s and she starts having babies, the baby can have Down syndrome, other birth defects, and it puts more strain on the body. So you're saying that it's for a limited amount of time that you abstain, and that was also something I was going to say before, is that we always talk about natural family planning, but what about just abstaining in general? But it's for a limited period of time that you abstain. But at the same time, what about those factors that the woman is at a much serious health risk, and it's not going to go away because she's just going to keep getting older?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this also goes into the fact that people get married. This wouldn't be a problem, what I just presented, if we as a society would understand that as soon as a boy can get a woman pregnant and a girl can get pregnant, we should be talking about marriage or priesthood or whatever. That people should be getting married in their teens. And so we wouldn't be having this conversation, because if they got married, say at like Connor's age or younger, by the time they're in their 30s, they've had probably 10 kids or whatever. They're not going to be able to have any more kids. Just naturally, the body is just like, I'm done. I gave you all the kids you're going to get. As opposed to if you're in your late 20s and you get married, and then you start having kids, by the time you're 35, your body is just like, well, what's going on? Why are you having all these kids now? You should have had these like 10 years ago.
Well, guys, I think as we close this conversation out, what I will say is this. I think while natural family planning, it probably should not be used as a form of birth control, I think there are oftentimes extenuating circumstances for a lot of people as to why they don't have a lot of kids. I think we've all seen the narcissism in our culture about, well, I got my career and things like that, and clearly there's problems there when people think that way. But I think there are some exceptions to the rules. Now, who decides that? Is it the church? Is it God? Is it a relationship between the couple and the priest? That I think is a broader discussion. But I think there is something to be said about the current system we live in and how it discourages. Listen. Look at the absolute just ridiculous cost of housing nowadays and what it would take to house a family that big. And listen, I know there's many great traditional traditionalist Catholics out there that haven't made it. They found their niche. They know how to do it. But not everybody has or comes into this world equally in respects of how life sort of falls upon us, really, in that respect, whether it's, we have a higher IQ, greater physical skills, better looking, we get inheritances, who knows what life throws at us. I'm just saying there are certain circumstances, I think, that would call for a responsible sort of method of determining family size. Not that we should opt out altogether. I'm not suggesting that, but I just think there are some circumstances. And as we close this cast out, I want to get everybody's final thoughts. Andrew, we'll go with you first, and then Connor, and then Julia.
I'll always end up back at divine providence, I think, and that's for the larger discussion about the interplay between the church in America and our culture or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And all the way down to the family level. There's an ignorance, almost a willful ignorance or distaste for even considering maybe it's our deist roots in the U.S. Maybe that's a chunk of it.
Yeah.
Our Calvinist root, but
Calvinist deist, you're right.
We don't consider. It's like the one thing you can't consider is that God will provide for us, and that's like the only that's the constant.
Okay.
That he keeps on repeating.
But
to
Julian,
us ever since he created us is we'll take care of you. We'll take care of you. We'll take care of you.
Julian. I'm sorry, not Julian. Andrew. My apology. Is it God will take care of you, or at this point in history, again in the usury system, is it the federal government that's going to take care of your kids?
Wow.
Because I'll tell you, I live in Mormonville. And I'm telling you right now, they got ways to go to the government to take care of all these kids. They got their little loopholes. They figure it out because it's hard enough just to buy housing nowadays to put a roof over these kids' heads.
I have no problem with that. I mean, honestly, I have zero problem with that because it's given the how many trillions of dollars that the government is spending on, I don't know, studying why the frogs are turning gay.
Yeah.
Wasn't that some big thing with the Alex Jones a few years ago?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just that's an actual study that they were doing, and I think that's actually one of the more meritful research projects that the government has funded. Given the choice between, I don't know, some of the wonky stuff that they want to give money to research and putting food on the table for, say, a Catholic family who suffered a loss, and I know multiple Catholic families who lost their provider, with 10 kids. So you got a single mom with 10 kids.
Sure.
And they had they should have had insurance. You'll hear people say, okay, well, dig into the insurance system a little bit, and that's just a way of spreading social risk around. That's all it's doing.
Well,
so what's the big difference between the government spreading social risk around and insurance companies spreading it around? What's the big difference between them?
Connor, I think one of the responses to what Andrew would say is, first of all, you have a conservative movement, classical liberal movement that says you can't go to government for anything. If you need help, you go to family. If you got a family of 12, well, you're going to be asking for a lot of help. Number two, there has been traditionalist families with large families, and they've lost their main provider, and they've received a one-time kind of charity from their traditionalist parish, and then nobody else is there to be found, and this family is left without a provider and all these children. I mean, there are some nuances there with what Andrew is addressing. I agree with Andrew in a lot of ways, but there's some nuances there. How do we deal with that?
It seems that it's kind of a case by case situation. In some cases, the extended family would be strong enough to help them. In some, you have organizations. I'm not too knowledgeable about this organization, but I know that they were founded partly for this purpose, like the Knights of Columbus, where they'll kind of help with that. I agree with Andrew that I really don't have a problem with these families getting some help from the government, given how much they waste on ridiculous things. And yeah, that it's just kind of a case by case.
Okay. All right. Julian, last question for you for the night here. What Andrew and Connor laid out, is it feasible, or is there just more nuances on the ground in America in 2021?
Well, I agree with Connor, and I definitely agree with Andrew, especially, about the government. I mean, if they're going to just print money, if the money machine goes burr, and if I have a family of 16, well, the government can make it rain on my family. So, I mean, hey, don't stop that money machine. But yeah, I mean, you have to find that money that just falls from the sky that the government's going to give that family of 16 is out there. You just have to find it. But it is hard though. The government does make it hard for you to get that money that just falls from the sky. But as long as you do what you have to do, you'll get it. But I think
it might be worth discussing the economic implication of a government being willing to incentivize people having more kids.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Hungary is giving out 12,000 for if you have 3 kids.
That's a good idea.
Hungary is actually financially incentivizing larger families more than the more kids you have, the more money they're going to give you. And I think America would be good to do that. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but one of the things that people do talk about it, but you won't see this in the mainstream media like CNN or whatever. One of the reasons why there's such a labor shortage in this country, whether it's due because of the holy virus known as COVID or other issues, it's because and one of the reasons why Social Security will never work, and it's also because it's a Ponzi scheme, and it was always a Ponzi scheme, is because we are contracepting ourselves to death. We are not replacing ourselves. So one of the reasons why immigration is such a big push is because we need the labor. We aren't naturally reproducing as Americans. So we can get cheap labor, or we can just have a lot of jobs, but not a lot of people to work them because we have aborted and contracepted ourselves to death.
Frank, if I could just say one more thing before we close up.
Sure.
In my opinion, in the opinion of many saints, I think that the best remedy for division, whether it be internal or external, would be the Holy Rosary given to St. Dominic by Our Lady. In the story, Our Lady gave to St. Dominic and to combat the Cathar heresy, and it brought unity back to France. But I mean, obviously, the sincere recitation of the Holy Rosary will repair any kind of damage, if it be God's will, internal or external.
All right. Very well said, my friends. Hey, gentlemen, this was a fantastic discussion. I think there was a lot that our audience will learn from this. I think there's a lot of depth and detail to what we talked about. My prayers go out to both Church Militant and Mike of Restoring the Faith for what's happened there. I hope those two parties can work it out. They are brothers and sisters in Christ from what I can see, and hope they can work it out. As far as our grander discussion about the Traditionalist movement, listen, I don't consider myself a trad. I just consider myself a Catholic at the end of the day. Maybe it's my Sicilian roots. Maybe it's just because I come from a more culturally homogenous part of the world. At least that's where my roots are, where these kinds of divisions really didn't exist. So I really don't understand them. I kind of fell into this kind of discussion about the difference between Novus Ordo and Traditionalists really on Facebook about a decade ago. I didn't even know these things existed. Call it my ignorance, call it whatever you want to call it. But you know what? At the end of the day, we're all Catholics. We all need to be praying for each other. And I think at the very least, we all need to try to be much more charitable to each other, especially online. I want to thank Andrew. I want to thank Connor. And I want to thank Julian for joining me tonight. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. May he reign. And St. Christian Militia right on Facebook. I'll put links up in the description box. Everybody, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. This is Frank signing off. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.